It's so good to see so many people here. So I think what we'll do today is go ahead and get started. Roxy, I'm opening your piece. And what we'll do is we'll start off and go with, I've prepared two artworks. So last week we compared two abstract pieces. So this week I thought we would do two representational pieces and analyze them together. We'll go a little bit quicker, and then at the end I'll bring up Roxy's work. So the first thing we do when we're critiquing is look at the work itself and just state the facts about it. So I'll do that about the painting on what I'm looking at is the left by Albert Edelfelt. Both of these are finished. Both of these I think are around the 1800s. I didn't write down the dates. Sorry about that. If any of you have not seen the website Museum, it's a museum, it leaves off the M. It's a fabulous conglomeration of artwork from museums that are offering their work in the public domain. And there's a lot of really great stuff there. So most of my pieces come from there, from pieces that you can download with no copyright restrictions. So I feel okay using them here in the class. So the first one on the left is by Albert Edelfelt. And I could not, it's Havia Istavia. He's a Russian artist. And the original way it was spelled was impossible to read. It's a finished painting. I believe it's oils. I don't have I also didn't write down the size, but we're just going to assume it's a finished painting. It's meant to hang on the wall. It's representational. It's a little bit impressionistic without photorealistic representations of the things. We know it's a painting of a girl sitting on a bed, reading a book with her dog, and there's a hat on the floor and a plant. So those are all facts that nobody can dispute, right? They are all just describing what we see. And then let's go through some of the elements of art. So the elements, again, let's keep it really simple. You just describe what you see: texture, shape, line, color, and value. And usually when we start a critique, we choose which of the elements speaks most strongly to us. So Ellen Hart, since we can hear you, yay.
I hope you can.
We can.
Yay.
Which element do you think is working very strongly in the Edelfelt painting?
I think texture.
Okay. Describe the texture. Remember that texture is both the way it feels, although in an oil painting, if you pet the oil painting, right, it would just be smooth in this case. But it's also the patterning that you see on the surface. So describe what you see in texture here.
Well, I think that her dress being lacy and frilly gives a lot of texture. And
how would you describe that texture? You can say, we know it's a depiction of fabric and we expect fabric to be soft, and we know those ruffles and laces would feel soft to our touch. So that's one way to describe the depiction of texture that we see here. Go on.
And I see texture just in the draping of the curtain.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it seems like in the bed and the pillow on the right, it's deliberately not textured. It's just sort of blurred out.
Okay, but that's a texture that the artist has chosen to put in with their brush strokes. If you look at the wall behind it, it's not flat paint like we would see on most of our walls. He's left it textured instead of smooth. If you look at the texture in the depiction of the greenery outside the window, it's kind of soft and blended together instead of sharply delineated, right?
Right.
So if you're looking at the texture, the patterning of the brush strokes here, everything's kind of soft and fuzzy, right? So overall, I would describe the texture in this piece as soft, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
All right. Anybody else want to volunteer to choose the next element?
This is Karen.
Okay, Karen, what element would you like to talk about?
Line.
Okay, describe the lines that you see.
Okay, the bed has an angle to it, you know, the edge that's closest to us. And that sort of draws me into it to look closer at the bed. And contrasting with that are the verticals from the window and the headboard. And then as a horizon, you've got the lower edge of the window. So the lines both direct my eye and they define the space a little bit.
Okay, that's good. There are very strong angled horizontal lines that enclose the girl and her dog in the bed. You've got the vertical line of the edge of the drapes that's repeated by the vertical line of the mullions and the feet of the bed and the headboard. You're right. What other lines do you see here?
May I could, this is Casey.
Casey, yeah, go ahead and tell us, describe any other lines that you see.
The line I immediately saw is the diagonal line that starts with the potted plant, goes down through her body to a literal point with her shoe. The fact that the book is red and her stockings are red kind of bring those together. And every time I look at it, that's the line I see, that very strong line from the plant down to her toe.
Okay, so her leg is a repeated vertical that repeats the window mullions, and that plant feels, I guess that is a vase, a very long, narrow vase that points down to the girl, and her whole body is also a line as well.
Yeah.
You brought up color. Would anybody else like to talk about color and just describe what you see in the color here? Oh, back to line one thing real quick. We often forget that there is a very, very strong line that is implied, but not drawn in anything when you look at eyes of a creature or a person and those eyes are looking somewhere. So you'll notice that your eyes are drawn to her face because that's what we humans do. We look at her eyes and her eyes are looking at the book. So there is an implied line of her gaze from her face down to the book. Okay, we were back to.
Is it possible for me to jump in?
Yes. Who
I
is
didn't know if you could hear me. This is Cherry.
Hi, Cherry. Yes.
More than anything that's been spoken of so far, that hit me was the color scheme.
Okay,
And
describe the colors that you see for us.
Complementary colors, green and red. The pinks are all reds. The greens and the curtain has green polka dots. The floor has green. Concerning texture, it almost appears as though it's a rainy day outside, which would make sense. The book calls my attention right away, and although the leggings are also red, they're a secondary red. There's also some red in that pillow next to her knee. That, I think, focuses your attention very easily with both the eyes and the red book on that particular part of the image.
Okay, and those reds are also the red of the book, and her stockings are also the strongest saturated colors as well. Many of the other colors are tinted or shaded or toned a little. Well, there's not a lot of toning except for in the shadows. And so there are very few really saturated colors except for the red in her stockings and in the book, which is also repeated but not as brightly, in the color of the pillow and the color of the ribbon, the color of the stripe of the sheets, the shadow on the back of the pillow, her dress.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of
Yeah,
red
there,
the
yeah.
the plaid. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some up there too. Even the dog's ear.
Has a little bit of red. And when you just start describing the things you see, describe the color you see, describe where it is, those things, you see more and more of those things. And so if a painting like this is predominantly red and green, what would that color scheme be called, Sherry?
Complementary.
Very good. All right, so we've talked about texture and line and color. What about shape? Casey, you want to take that on?
Well, to me, the shape is still sort of dominated by that. It's almost a V shape, if that's what you're looking for. I see from the top of the flowers down to her toe, and then sort of back up to the pillow again. But
right.
maybe that's not the shape you're talking about.
Yeah, let's just go. Anna, it's good to see you here, by the way. Do you want to just describe the shapes that you see in this piece?
Well, there's a lot of different shapes. There's the squares of the pillows, the rectangles of the window, the rectangles of the bed going this way. So and I do like how he uses the shapes to complement each other. Yeah.
What other shapes do you see?
Well, circular.
Where?
And he does it in a lot of different ways. I love how he uses the reds to bring a circle. It brings us around the piece, like the red of the hat hits the red of the planter, the red of the pillow. So there's a circular shape that's unseen that is there too.
Really?
Right, so there's a lot of organic shapes. We've got the circular kind of plant, the circle of her head, the circle-ish shape of the dog, the circle-ish shape of the hat. Her body with the main part of her body with the cushions that she's sitting in are kind of a contained shape, but all very organic, right? So we have the man-made shapes of the window and the wall and the curtain and the bed, and then the organic shapes of the soft furnishings and the organisms in the piece, right? So what does shape do in a work of art? Shape has activity, it has movement. The kinds of shapes you put in a work of art can help you feel a kind of movement or stillness. And the shapes here, let's have Liz. Do you want to describe the kind of movement or stillness that you feel from the shapes that this artist has used?
Well, it's overall stillness, maybe because the shapes don't have a lot of push to them. The girl is settled down into the bed, onto the cushions. The only sort of motion I feel from it is it looks like her legs are probably twitching.
Yeah. Okay, so this is an interesting thing to look at. The largest shape in our head, it might not be the largest shape in the actual painting if we measured the size of each shape in the painting. Our head completes the size of that bed, right? And in our head, we know beds are horizontal. They're a place where you're still, and that horizontal large shape kind of grounds the activity of the whole piece. And she's contained on top of that bed and below the window. And you're right, Why is it that we feel the only movement here might be her legs? They're a diagonal line. They're a diagonal shape that's hanging off the edge of that. They're not really grounded, right? It looks like her feet are dangling. So that's one of the only places where we might get a sense of movement. Maybe there's a breeze blowing outside though, with all those very soft textures. We could get a feeling of stillness, or just the texture there kind of moves your eye in a very gentle way. But overall, the shapes and the whole combination of elements here gives you a feeling of peace and a feeling of stillness. And besides just the subject matter, the positioning of the shapes, the positioning, the softness of those textures gives us that feeling of stillness and peace. So we haven't talked about value yet. Mary, do you want to try taking on value?
Not really.
Okay. Joan?
I find it really hard to look at it and see all of the different elements.
It takes a lot of practice, and and as we should, we look at a work of art as a whole, right?
Right.
But when you develop the understanding of what each element does, and you begin to be able to use the vocabulary of the visual language, picking out each of these elements and kind of describing what they do is just an objective and good way to understand what's happening. Whether the artist used those elements purposefully or not, as we analyze what is happening because of the elements in the piece, we can then use that knowledge in the work that we make. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Could I make an observation, please? This is
Who's
Cherry.
this? Cherry, yes.
When you start at the bottom right of the picture, the leg on the bed is a V. You go up to the curtain, and the curtain is a V. You go up to the plant is a V. You come down to the book, and the book is a V, with the dog's V ear above it, or partial triangle, or whatever. I see, and that makes movement in my mind as I go around that, and so I end up on a circle. I'm going round and round.
Right. So that's one of the things that lines and shapes also do. Line is the thing that carries your eye from one place to the next. My eye goes to, if I'm starting on the lower right, I go straight up her leg instead of off on the bed, because that line is so strong. And this is where we get into value as well. Value is light against dark, right?
This is Leanne. Could I address the value?
Yes, please.
So value to me is really, really important. And I can see from the highlight on her hair and the light parts of the ruffles that the sunshine or the light is coming from behind her and it's spotlighting her. The other thing is the very dark value of the underside of that bed really accentuates that line, which is actually almost a diagonal line. So even though there's a lot of horizontals, that little bit of diagonal gives this piece energy in addition to that stillness.
Right. We're not asleep as we're looking at this, right?
Right.
We've got all these subtle things, and you're right, it is a diagonal line, but in our head we see beds as completely horizontal and flat, otherwise you'd roll off, right? So those two things are going on in our head at the same time. We've got a strong horizontal, but it is depicted on a diagonal. Her leg is a diagonal. The edge of the book is the diagonal. The ribbons coming off the hat on the bottom are also a diagonal. So because of value contrast, that's where most of the really strong lines are here. We've got that the strongest value contrast is the dark under the bed and the white of the bed, right?
Right.
So we've got that very strong line, and it's interrupted by her leg, which is one of the darker values, if we look at this in black and white. And then her dress, you're right, you mentioned all those sun highlights on the girl, but she's surrounded by darker pillows that also enclose her. And her hair is also dark and encloses her face, the highlights of her face. So that contrast between dark and light, the value that's dark next to the lightest values, are things that attract your attention and also form the edges of shapes and lines that move your eye throughout the work. So those are how all of the elements are working together in this piece to create the composition. And then after we describe the elements, we would go through and talk about the principles, such as focal point. This piece has a really strong focal point. Joan, do you want to try talking about focal point? Do you see any area of emphasis or a main idea in this piece? Joan? How about Phil?
I think actually the focal point would be that little circle of the book and the girl and the little dog.
Excellent.
And
it does create kind of a circle, right?
Yeah. It definitely leads your eye there, and then you start looking at all of the other stuff going on around.
Right. Also, anytime there is a person or a creature with eyes, as humans, we're attracted to looking at other people's eyes. It's just how we're wired. And the value contrast and the shape and line of the edge of that book that leads you up to the dog and the girl's face, that's a definite focal point. And then all the other elements that we talked about then take your eye throughout the rest of the piece. Who wants to talk about balance and symmetry? Roxanne?
Okay. Well, first of all, it's an asymmetric balance piece. Because we have the girl and the hat sort of leaning over on the left side, balanced by the curtain and the pillow and on the right side.
It's interesting that you mentioned the hat and the pillow that are kind of two different sized things.
Yes.
But they're kind of equidistant from the girl. They echo each other's colors.
Exactly.
And they're two very different things, but they definitely balance each other.
Balance the piece, right? If the hat weren't there, it would feel, the piece would like, it would feel like there's not enough going on in the bottom of the piece. It wouldn't feel balanced.
There's something to draw your eye there, but then your eye continues back on around.
Right.
Very good. Anybody want to talk about unity, visual unity? Is there anything here that looks like it is out of place? And how is unity or visual harmony created in this piece? Any volunteers?
This is Leanne. We've already talked about the hue of the red creating unity, and the contrast with the green. Even the greens, although they're slightly different in those pillows, they're both green. One's got a little more blue than the other.
Okay, so unity is often created through repetition and sometimes by limitations. So here it's kind of a limited color palette. It isn't wild. We've got the unity of the reds and the greens, the softness of those reds. And through repetition, we've got the repetition of the strong reds, the repetition of the greens, the repetition of all those very soft textures. For instance, if there was anything in here that was painted like it is on the painting on the right, it would look completely out of place, wouldn't it? Because the rest of everything is so soft. So there's that unity, there's that repetition of texture that makes everything look like it belongs there. Does anybody see anything here that looks out of place? I don't. Okay, so we've got unity and variety. We've got repetition, we've got balance and symmetry, we've got a focal point. We've talked about motion already, how there's a feeling of calmness and stillness here, but it isn't dead still. There's movement of the eye as we go around the piece. Are there any other things that people want to say about this? This is a point where we could go through and talk about what does it remind you of? How does it make you feel? And why do you feel that way when you look there? Very quickly, does anybody want to talk about those things?
This is Diane. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Hi. Actually, going back to shape or movement, the curtain, there's creases or wrinkles in the curtain. Even though there isn't any indication that the window is open, I get the feeling that the curtain might just start blowing, you know, or it could move softly. That I see some movement in that curtain based on the wrinkles.
Okay, good. Anybody else?
I think there is an indication, this is Cherry, there's an indication that the window is open because the sash is not there on the right-hand side behind that curtain.
Okay. Does anybody have any associations or memories or feelings that go along with this piece?
This is Roxanne. I definitely get a homey, cozy feeling from it. And having been a reader as a child, it just brings back memories of sitting with my cat and reading, you know,
nice.
At home.
Anybody else?
This is Ellen.
Go.
I think that it definitely looks like an old-timey scene. It's certainly not contemporary. So.
Okay. It gives you kind of a nostalgic pastime kind
yes.
of. Anybody else?
Yeah, Mary.
Hi, Mary.
Yeah, the fact that hat is laying on the floor and she's so absorbed in that book, it appears, it looks to me like she was someplace fancy that she really didn't want to be and couldn't wait to get into that book.
Could be. All right. Very, very good. Wonderful. Let's do not as long, but a very quick compare and contrast between the piece that we just analyzed and the piece on the right, the Pearson niche with falconry gear piece, which is in a very different style, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you looked at if you compared the texture between the two, one is very smooth, very sharp, the other is very soft. If we looked at the shapes on this piece, they're very defined here. They're all organic, some all kind of man-made, but they're all in curves, aren't they? Except for that long horizontal on the bottom. There's curves, there's the straight line of whatever pins these things are here. There's an arrow down here.
It's a net weaver.
Yep. Is it?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
The colors in here are much more clear. They're more saturated. And who wants to describe what colors we see in the piece on the right?
This is Phil.
Yes.
I think overall this, you can definitely see this is a very masculine composition.
Just name the colors that you see and where they are.
Brown being, you know, predominantly associated with sort of muscular composition. And as you say, everything is very defined and sort of structured.
Okay. We also have a bright gold on the right. That's definitely in the yellow category. We're centered once again with a clear red. And then even though these are not clear greens, we have a green tint to whatever this thing hanging down is and to the two horns, the two hunting horns we see. So we've got red and green and yellow, and then all of the neutrals of the browns that are happening here, which is interesting because in the piece on the left, we've also got reds and greens, but they have a very different feel, don't they?
Yes.
Yes.
One of the things that's most different between the two is value contrast. Value,
Yeah.
again, is one of the elements that we ignore far too often. Who hasn't had a chance to speak up and would like to and describe the value that we're seeing here?
It's Tracy here.
Hi, Tracy. Go for it.
There's a much higher value contrast in the piece on the right, which shows from the shadows of the cage, as well as the different shapes as colorings. So the different shapes are very defined because of the different values of each shape. Even though a lot of the colors are more or less the same, the value shows the definition between each piece.
Very good, very good. And if we're describing where the values are that we see the wall on the outside as very high value, right? That's one of the most high value places, the lightest. It's a whitewashed wall. It's where the sun is hitting it the most. We've got a little bit of reflection. The darkest values are both, that might be a powder bag, I'm not sure, on the left. And then the deep shadows next to the niche and inside the niche, and the darkness of the hunting horn that we see here in the other implements, which I need to go look up falconing and research it, because I know what some of the things are, but I'm really interested. What is this red odd thing?
That's the thing you put over the
Oh, it's a
falcon.
hood.
Yes.
A hood with a decoration on top. What is this thing down below? Is that a whistle of some sort? A signaling whistle. And what, does anybody know what the bag at the top left is?
Lunch.
Hmm?
Is it lunch?
Lunch. Oh, they do keep little snacks for the birds, don't they? I would think it would be in the bigger pouch. I don't know. I grew up shooting muskets and black powder rifles, so the horns remind me these are hunting horns. There's a mouthpiece on that one that you can blow a sound on, but the pouch to me looks like powder and lead balls for hunting with the musket. That's entirely beside the point. So the value contrast and the clean lines here create a whole different feeling to the composition, right? We've got lines that lead the eye in a much different way than they did before. Does anybody want to talk about how lines lead the eye? And we'll tie that in with focal point here. Any volunteers? Vincent, do you want to give it a try? You have to unmute yourself.
Hello, here's Vincent.
Yes, hello. Why don't you describe the lines in the piece and how they lead your eye around?
My eyes go in the middle to the red color. It's the first attraction for me. And then the eyes make a circle around the image.
Okay. So what line takes your eye?
The round shape in the top, and the round shape in the middle is this what I find the most attractive for me.
Very good. Don't know what I just did to my cursor. Okay, so I think probably this is an undeniable focal point, right? Both because it's the most saturated intense color, that red. It's in the middle of the thing. It's surrounded by empty space. This area over here on the bottom left with the horn and the net and all these things next to the cage, it's a very texturally and patternful, complex area of the painting, right? Compared to the real simplicity in the back of the niche that is surrounding that red hood. So we have focal point here created because of the isolation in texture of that, of the hood, because of the strength and the difference in that texture. And then we have lines that carry the eye around. The horn, all the pieces here, notice how they're all touching the niche. They're all connected together by the frame of that niche, and there's space all the way around them on the outside that keeps your eye in, that keeps all of these things, all of these shapes, all of these different objects connected together as a unified part of the composition. So that covers the focal point and the journey the eye takes. It feels very unified to me. Does anybody see anything here that looks out of place?
I have a question. This is Ellen.
Thank you, Ellen. What's your question?
When you talk about symmetry or balance, really, somehow, I guess it seems balanced, but technically it's not, I don't think.
Okay, symmetry and balance are two different things. Symmetry is when you have equal size and equal shapes on either side of an axis, which this obviously does not, right? We do have a central axis, and our focal point is right in the center, and that arch is symmetrical, but there are not identical objects on both sides of that axis, right?
Right.
So balance is different than that, though. Balance can be asymmetrical or symmetrical or crystallographic or radiographic, but objects that are very different from each other can have equal visual weight. For instance, we've got this area down at the bottom with the net and those points and the horn and that red string. It's a very, very complex collection of stuff down in that bottom left, right? So it has attention to it. And then there is also this kind of empty space on the inside upper right. And because it's a lot larger than that complex area, but it kind of balances out that complex area. Even though they're very different from each other, they have an equal visual weight to them. For instance, the yellow strap on the right, it's a different color than everything else there. It's a little bit brighter, and it's simpler than all of that stuff on the left. Imagine, even put your hand or your finger up so that that is not, so that you can't see it. Go ahead and cover up that in your vision so that all you're seeing is all the complex things on the left. And doesn't it feel just left bottom heavy?
Yeah.
And then you put that thing on the right, and even though it's a simpler shape and it's a simpler thing than all the complex things on the left, it adds balance. So things don't have to be the same size, they don't have to be the same texture or anything like that to balance each other and have equal visual weight. So this piece is more symmetrical. The painting on as a whole is more symmetrical than the painting on the left. Because we've got that thing centered right in the middle of the niche, which is centered in the middle of the painting, but it's still asymmetrical. So it's more symmetrical than the piece on the left, but it's still asymmetrical. And we've got different areas that are balancing each other with the same kind of visual weight. Does that answer your question, or was that just a long ramble?
No, that was very good for me.
Okay, let's talk about, oh, here's a fun thing. Let's talk about depth and space, which are principles in any painting that we have. It's just a flat surface, right? We don't have reality of depth and space, but we have the illusion of it. What are things that create the illusion of depth within the frame of this work? Anybody want to give it a try?
Shadows.
Shadow.
Yeah. Somebody say something, sorry.
This is Casey. I'll
Yes,
give it a
Casey.
shot. And I wanted to echo before I start with depth the bit about the strap. That was one of the first things I noticed, is that if you squint at this picture, all the rest of the details kind of blur, but the yellow strap on the right really stands out. So I think that's what gives it that good balance. So
Yeah, it's got a strong presence to it.
I did that.
Good.
But for the depth, I mean, the obvious answer is obviously the shadows give it depth, but also the perspective of the cage. Vanishing point, isn't that where it kind of goes back in? There's a lot of depth in that bag up on the left, just with the use of those 3 white highlighted dots makes it look like there's definitely something big and round pushing against that leather bag, just with the use of that highlighting.
Very good. And a way to describe this using the language of the elements is that we have value contrast. When light comes, it is high value. And then where the light cannot reach, where those shadows are, it's dark value. So in this case, it is a case of depth being created by lower values. As you go back imaginary into the back of that niche, it's farther away from your light source. And you're right, the perspective is all about lines. The lines that meet at a vanishing point. We can't actually see the lines on the corners of the niche and draw them in, and the bird cage might not be perfectly, it's almost more of an isometric perspective that's happening here. But because we see those things in life, we understand that they have depth and space. So very good. Does anybody want to, I want to leave the last 10 minutes to look at Roxanne's work.
I just have one more thing to add to the depth and space lyric.
Yes.
Whenever you have all these elements overlapping each other, like you have one thing on top of another thing on top of another thing, even though they're not actually doing that on a flat canvas, it looks as if they are, and that creates the illusion of depth too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you can do that with any, even if it's an abstract with just shapes that don't even represent anything. If they overlap each other, the one that you can see all of it looks like it's closer to you than the one that's behind it. It's a very simple way to create the illusion of depth and space. Does anybody have any last comparisons between the 2 paintings, or any other things to say about the Pearson painting?
This is Karen. When I look at these first glance, the one on the left, Albert, has a feminine feel to it, whereas on the right, the niche, that just looks masculine.
Yeah, and those are cultural associations.
Yes.
That might be different for every person. I've never worn a frilly dress in my life, but I read all the time, and I have actually held some of those kind of tools in my life. So I identify with both of them, and both of the painters are male. So the associations and the feelings that we have with things are personal and cultural and really interesting to each person. It's always fun to see inside another viewer's mind and see how they relate to the 2 differences. Anybody else?
I like this is Anna. I like the way the one is soft and inviting, and the other one is sharp and it makes you want to do something. It has action to it when one has passivity to it.
That's a really interesting thing. The clearness and there's a lot of swoopy lines in this one, aren't there? So it moves your eye around in a much more aggressive way, all of those lines in the piece on the right. And yeah, it does have much more of a feeling of action to it. Very good. Anybody else? Okay, very good, everybody, by the way. Excellent job.
Thank you.
Roxanne submitted a work that is in process, and we will look at that really quickly. Let me get all the other junk out of the way on my screen. And I think, there we go. So when we start a quick critique, Roxanne, I'm going to ask you a few questions. This is, and I'll describe what I see. These are just the facts about the piece. We're going to do a really quick critique, and as we do this, I also want you, Roxanne, to think about what is it that you want from us? What do you want to learn from this? And sometimes it can just be, all I want is, how pretty is it? Or, you know, everybody, whenever you put up a thing for critique, you have to know what you want. Otherwise, you'll be surprised at what you get. So the facts about this piece is it's pieced cloth made from mostly solids. It looks unfinished, correct? Okay. It's mostly abstract. It might be based on a representation of something, but for now I'm going to call it abstract shapes. And then as we go into shape and line and color and texture and value, I'm just going to really quickly do a rundown, okay? So color, I see teals and yellows, and the complement of teal would be a red-orange, but it's a very high-value peach. And then we've got the neutrals of the grays and the whites in here. Shapes, they're all curved. They're all kind of organic, but they're very pointy at the same time, with a predominant direction of up and down, except for the gray shapes that interrupt it that are more lines because they're long and narrow. There's nothing on a grid here. It's a very organic piece. So that's color and shape, a little bit about line, texture. It's very smooth and flat with most of the solids and the whites and the grays. There is a difference in texture in some of the teals with that crackled, mottled, kind of dyed look to most of the teals, but they look to be the only pieces in here that have that patterning and that texture. I don't see an overall repetition of pattern in this piece, except for the repetition of the shapes of the pods and the kind of spears, and then the repetition of the lines that in grays are mostly horizontal. Shape, texture, value contrast. The place I see the most value contrast is in the center with, you've got the highest white, and these could be a very dark teal or they could be black. Everybody's monitor, by the way, is going to be different. So color gets a little tricky online.
They're dark teal.
Yeah, dark teal. Everybody's color could be a little bit different than what I'm seeing. So the highest value contrast is that dark teal. It's all on the left side and it's next to the highest white. There's this space on the upper right is right now the most open space. And then this space on the lower left is the most complex collection of shapes and colors. So texture, shape, color, line, value. That was a really, really quick run through of all the elements. Does anybody else have anything to say to describe the elements they're seeing here? Okay, so focal points, unity, I don't see a focal point here. Right now it's kind of an all over thing. Balance and symmetry, I don't see anything that looks like it's out of balance. Because there's the repetition, there's this big yellow over here, but it's also scattered in a couple other places. There's a little bit of this peach, but it's also repeated. There's none of it over here. And then the other colors are kind of well integrated. There's even a tiny bit of the dark teal over on the right side. A lot of times people don't integrate their value contrast enough. So they've got one side with one color or one weight of value contrast and the other side is different. But you've pulled each of those just barely enough across that center vertical seam that it feels well integrated. And also those gray lines that break across that strong center line also integrate the pieces and make it feel balanced and unified. There's a flowing motion as my eye goes around the piece here. I don't see anything out of balance. Anybody else have anything that they want to describe about the piece? At this point, it's not, I like this or I don't like this. It's just describe what you're seeing in terms of the elements and principles. Does anybody want to add anything?
I do. This is Anna. I like the way that the silver or the gray pieces, they bring me up like a nest. So what they do for me is they carry me from the bottom of the piece to the center, and then it looks like it's going off the page, but it's not, because it's brought back by that tiny little gray piece that comes this way that brings it right back into the page again, which gives this wonderful flow. So it gives me this focus that I go to.
An interesting path for the eye to follow.
Correct.
Okay, good. Anybody else? Okay, Roxanne, what questions do you have for us?
Okay, so I'm considering adding a third piece of that peach color onto the left side somewhere in a very small amount. Do you think that would add to the balance of the piece? Or do you think it's enough?
It would integrate the left side with the right side more than it is now.
Okay.
You have, like I said, you have yellow on both sides. You've got all the other colors on both sides.
Okay.
And then the peach is only on the right side. I don't think it's absolutely necessary. One thing that I would suggest, that I suggest all my students do, is get out your camera and add or lay down a piece in different places on the left side. Take pictures of all the options and then look at the thumbnails together.
Good idea.
To see what, when you look at all the thumbnails next to each other, you can usually eliminate the bad ones immediately.
Yeah, I've actually done that, and that's a really great way to approach something like this.
Right.
Also, if you look at can you see my cursor at all?
Nope, because I'm the one with the screen.
Okay.
You'll have
On
to.
the upper right-hand corner of the piece, there's that gray arc. Yes, that right there. What I'm thinking of doing with the quilting is putting some gray quilting across some areas of the right, some, like maybe, I don't know, maybe off to the left. Just repeating that shape in like 3 or 4 lines of gray quilting. So it kind of repeats that arc in another 2 or 3 places, like another place, and then maybe a third place, because I really like that.
One thing that I have found my iPad really, really useful for is figuring out stuff like that.
Okay.
And I make it a point never to tell somebody this is what you should do with your piece.
Yeah.
You have to figure it out. But again, test and see. You could take a printout of this and use colored pencils to draw over it to figure out. And always as with quilts as an art form, we've got that added layer of stitch.
Right.
Everybody works a different way, but I know I make my top and then I haven't thought about the quilting at all as I go. Some people start with that in mind. Everybody has a different way to work, but then I'm stuck with, how am I going to add the element of stitched line and texture to this piece and color if we use colored threads without ruining it?
Yeah.
and that's when the testing to see comes into place.
Okay.
And again, I find printouts and colored pencils an amazing thing to use when I'm trying to figure out colors of thread or weight of thread. I just unspool the colors of the thread and lay it down on top and stand back and look to see what I like. Put them all down there together to see what you'd like. You could even do that with this. Take your gray thread and put it in the lines, and realize that if you do add colored stitching that stands out from what you have there already, it's going to be an element of line that leads the eye somewhere else. It's going to be value contrast. It's going to be to create shapes and textures.
Yes, I would use it very sparingly in this piece because there's already a lot going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking that the quilting, already in my mind, I'm thinking the quilting is going to be, lots of straight lines, probably walking foot, maybe some gentle curving. But I'll preview all that.
Yeah. What's interesting is that I started off with fabric sewing garments. So this is a sleeve.
Right.
This is a sleeve cap to me. So I'm picturing jackets as I look at it, which would be really cool.
I kind of I like the shape, and I'm not going to change the shape because I don't know what else I would do to it. I'm just going to keep it that shape.
Okay. Very good. And the outer shape of a work becomes part of the overall shape, especially when it's not in a
rectangle,
square or rectangle like we're used to viewing art. So our time is up. I want to thank so many of you people for coming on today and participating. I appreciate it. It's recording. Last time I recorded, I said I would get it up by the end of the day. I'm going to try really hard to get it up by the end of the day today again. And if I don't, Roxy, you're in charge of sending me a text. But it will be up on my YouTube channel. Just look at lyrickinard.com.
Okay.
And I'll have today's date on it. So look there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
It's
I really
appreciate
it.
You.
Thank
All
you
right.
very much.
And we'll see you same time, same place, same link next week. And if any of you have work that you want us to critique at lyrickinard.com, you can send me an email. We need a clear photo. It's nice sometimes if it's a finished work, if you have an up-close detail of it as well. And we can do a rundown critique of your work. Otherwise, I just bring up other artworks and we just practice. So till next week, thank you all. Stay well, stay safe, make art, be happy.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye. Thank you.
Lyric, this is Diane.
Yes.
I missed a couple weeks, but I did email you a couple quilts for critique. I don't know if you already use them or if not.
Probably, I vaguely remember. If you could send me the emails again, I'd appreciate it, and we can look at those next week.
And also on the first week, you talked about your critique list or the outline for the critiquing. And I know you said you were going to put it on your blog. I still have not been able to find it.
Because I didn't put it up. I forgot.
So
Diane, you be in charge of sending me an email and asking me when I'm going to get it up tomorrow.
All right.
That tomorrow.
All right.
I need other brains besides my own in order to function.
Teamwork. It's okay.
Okay. Thank you all.
All right.
Love
Thank
you
you so
guys.
much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.